Hello there, and welcome to the Thinking Fellows podcast. My name is Caleb, and I am joined by my father, Dr. Scott Keith, and by our friend, John Hoyam. John, how you doing?
I'm doing all right. Happy to be here with you guys.
Where are we exactly? Why don't you tell people where we are and what we're doing?
We're in Arkansas. We are at the Bentonville Here We Still Stand Regional Conference. So we're sitting in a hotel room. I'm impressed really with the accommodations. We've got a good spot to record. So
yeah, this is a really cool spot. I think as we continue to do regional events, something like this is, I don't know, if we can pull off this vibe in these kinds of spaces around the country, it'd be something worth coming to, because not only is the conference material great, but if you come, there's plenty of opportunity to just hang out and meet people, to talk, and the people who organize these events, Dan and Lana, really should get a lot of praise for like putting us in great locations that allow you to have a good time. So I don't know if they'll listen or hear this, but I think people out there should know that.
I think Dan listens.
Yeah, I think he should know that this ends up being exceptional, not only for the staff of 1517, but for the guests who come. And so I'm very happy to be recording here, very happy to be able to do conferences again, and looking forward to being able to wrap up the commandments in the Large Catechism today. We are at the 9th and 10th commandment, which, as my dad pointed out towards the end of the last episode, falls under one subheading here in the Large Catechism. We talked about that a little bit in the episode on the Small Catechism, how they talk roughly about the same thing, but then just parse the pieces of what ultimately becomes a prohibition on coveting your neighbor's possessions or house, home, wife, whatever it may be.
It's interesting. It's kind of broken into stuff and people and or animals.
Yes, yeah. It is an interesting breakup.
Well, you got to think about the time in which it was written. That even the time the commandments given, that the things of value that you had would have been your physical property, which was likely your house or your land, and then your family. At this point in time, your servants and your livestock.
I wonder what we could correlate to servants today. Like, you could almost say like the teachers, like public school teachers. I mean, they're not servants, but that's performing one of the tasks that a household servant would have had. Maybe your local like grocery store employees, people in service jobs. I mean, what we would call service jobs. The gas station attendant. People who make it so that normal, ordinary life, the things that you don't think about, but you absolutely need, are happening around you every day, right?
I think a lot of people, if you're in a position where you manage people, you might think you're employees. Because the idea here is that people that aren't direct family, but probably have to listen to what you say in one way, shape, or form. And in this point too, you might even just think position, right? What are you coveting if a person has servants? You're probably coveting their position.
Oh, that's
the fact
point.
that they do have servants. What are you coveting if you cover somebody's wife? Well, you're probably coveting his position that he has a wife and that she's beautiful, or whatever, or that she seems better than your wife, or however you want to.
Cooks better than your wife.
Yeah, whatever. And it's or if you don't have a wife, just the fact that you've got a wife. So a lot of this has to do with coveting I think on the sort of servants, cattle, you're coveting who your neighbor is. Right?
That probably is a good summary of the whole thing. Yeah. I mean, if you're looking at their possessions as well, there's something about their life that you wish was your life.
Yeah.
And not just the possessions. And I think Luther helps with that interpretation just as early as the second paragraph here, because he talks about that you would think a lot of these things were already prohibited. He's already saying that, like, unchastity. So, coveting your neighbor's wife is ultimately going to lead to unchastity. Theft, that's already prohibited. So why are we adding these among there? And he says that God added these two commandments in order that it be esteemed as sin and forbidden to desire or in any way aim at getting your neighbor's wife, possessions, and especially because under Jewish government, manservants, maidservants were not free as they are now to serve for wages, as they long pleased, but were their master's property with their body and all they had, as cattle and other possessions. Moreover, every man had power over his wife to put her away publicly by giving her a bill of divorce and to take another. Therefore, they were in constant danger among each other, that if one took a fancy to another's wife, he might allege any reason, both to dismiss his own wife and to estrange the other wife's from her husband, that he might obtain her under pretext of right that was not considered a sin nor a disgrace with them, as little as now with hired help, when a proprietor dismisses his manservant or maidservant and takes another manservant away from him in any way. So it's interesting. It's basically saying there are going to be some conventional, maybe even legal methods to get around stealing, to get around adultery, to get around all these things. And this commandment is putting a prohibition on the desires that lead to what might otherwise be quote-unquote legal behaviors.
Yeah, so even think of it in terms this way. In civil society, I used to teach the basic theology class at the university, and we'd have a sort of vast array of students in that class: believers, not believers, Lutherans, Baptists, Roman Catholics, whatever. And we would teach, we wouldn't teach out of the catechism directly, but a lot of the sort of basic theology texts, if they're from a Lutheran bent, will have a lot of this sort of repeated in them intentionally or unintentionally. And so you get to teaching the commandments with this sort of vast array of people, some of whom have heard it their whole lives, have no problem believing it, and many of whom have never heard it and think that this is confirming some bias that Christians are just a bunch of judgmental people. One of the things you can point out with, let's say, you could maybe even start with the fourth commandment, like how important it is in a civil society to respect parents and other authorities, right? You can maybe even start there. But definitely once you get to the fifth commandment and the sixth commandment and the seventh commandment and the eighth commandment, as you're going through killing, no adultery, stealing, I mean, you can make the case through those commandments that all that's being reflected here is what most societies around the world accept as just normal, right? And punish as wrongdoing. Mm-hmm. In most societies around the world, and this was always fun because you could always say, look at, in almost every society around the world, or if not every, murder is punished as a crime. Well, I know of my anthropology professor told me of this society where ritual sacrifice was a given norm, and you could easily say, yes, but that's not murder, right? That was a sanctioned body deciding to take the life in a sanctioned form of another person. It's still wrong, it's probably still grotesque and all that, but it's not murder. Even in that society, murder was punished, right? Rape was punished. Oh, but they could take another woman that could be her wife of another society, maybe, right, on conquest or something like that.
Rules about war.
But internally, in their society, you get to the 9th and 10th commandment, and there's a flip on that, right? You're now overtly teaching, and God is overtly teaching in the 9th and 10th commandment that it is wrong, that something on the inside that you do only on the inside is wrong, and has in fact made the list of things that are wrong, which if you sort of take them at their face without Luther's explanations or other explanations like murder, are just wrong on the outside, right? Because when the commandment itself says thou shalt not murder, you don't get the long explanation of Luther that explains that is, or Jesus for that matter, that's thinking with somebody hatefully towards somebody or wanting them to die or some such thing. In the 9th and 10th commandment, you get it overtly taught that something that just happens on the inside is as bad as the stuff you do on the outside. Now, that's a real shift. That's a real cultural shift. That's a real theological shift, too. I mean, most theologies of the world aren't going to talk about things that only happen in your mind being as sinful as the things you do on the outside. And so I think these are significant for that reason. And then if you go back, the other commandments that you've probably broken, murdering, stealing, adultery, whether you've broken them overtly, outwardly, or whether you've broken them only in your heart, you started breaking them because you first broke the 9th and 10th commandment.
I think that's a good way to say it, yeah.
You coveted something that belonged to somebody else, whether it was their wife, whether it was their stuff, whether it was their house, whether it was their reputation, whatever it was, you coveted something that belonged to them, their good name, and that coveting caused you to do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it goes back to the first commandment as well.
Right. You coveted what was God's.
You want to be God's.
Well, not only that you coveted God's position, but I mean, coveting in its most basic sense questions God. Why have things been distributed in this way and not that way?
Mm-hmm.
And so at its root, coveting is a lack of faith in God's care and provision for us in creation. That's what coveting is.
Yeah.
It's the belief that I must have gotten the short end of the stick, and I must in some way provide for myself. It's the internal thing that starts all these other sins. But it begins with looking out at the world and saying, I don't think this is quite right.
Yeah.
I think I could have designed this better.
Right.
And you know who would have had more things, better stuff, cooler wife, whatever? Me.
Yeah.
And so it all goes back to it's a nice bookend with the first commandment.
Absolutely.
9 and 10.
Well, yeah, you make yourself the most important object in creation.
Yeah.
When you do that too, above your neighbor, above your household. It's
coveting, I think, is a nice bookend for both. I mean, coveting will cause you to sin in each one of these commandments.
Yeah.
What causes you to disrespect your parents?
You wish you had their authority.
Yeah, you covet their position.
Yeah.
What causes you to take the Lord's name in vain, right? You
You
covet
wish you had God's authority.
And power.
Yeah, and you covet his name. You covet the honor and the glory that his name brings. What causes you to not hold the Sabbath holy? You covet that he has a day that seems as for him, right? You covet your own time to not spend that time receiving his gifts.
Yeah, me time.
Yeah.
I can give myself gifts that nourish me spiritually, right?
Right.
I don't have to receive the word or
Self-care.
or the sacraments. Self-care.
Self-care. Yeah. Did you take enough time to self-care this week, John?
Did you drink some water?
Yeah. I am trying to repair some damage with some self-care with this water bottle right now.
And there's nothing wrong with self-care or acting even with some self-interest, but it's...
Well, we
it's
can
when
see
you-
the extrapolation of what this is.
Yeah.
And even as a cultural phenomenon, right? Like taking care of yourself, good. Self-care as a established sort of religious phenomena within the United States or Western culture in general, bad. Like, or at least can be bad, or comes from some sort of desire to replace God.
Yeah.
So, let's see. Let's find some good paragraphs to read here. This last commandment, therefore, is given not for rogues in the eyes of the world, but just for the most pious, who wish to be praised and to be called honest and upright people, since they have not offended against former commandments, as especially the Jews claim to be, and even now many great noblemen, gentlemen, and princes. For the other common masses belong yet farther down under the seventh commandment, as those who are not much concerned whether they acquire their possessions with honor and right. Now this occurs most frequently in cases that are brought into court, where it is the purpose to get something from his neighbor and to force him out of his own possessions. As to give examples, when people quarrel and wrangle about a large inheritance, real estate, they avail themselves of and resort to whatever has the appearance of right, so dressing and adorning everything that the law must favor on their side. And they keep the property with such title that no one can make complaint or lay claim thereto. In a like manner, if anyone desire to have a castle, a city, a duchy, or any other great thing, he practices so much financiering through relationships and by any means he can, that the other judicially deprived of it, and it is adjudicated to him and confirmed with deed and seal and declared to have been acquired by princely title and honesty. Oh, and honestly. Again, that's is very interesting because, like this, he's now covered in several sections here that one of the ways that this goes pretty masked is that getting things that you covet can be done in a legal manner. It can be done in what seemingly right.
Right.
Even like tricking somebody out of something.
Scheming,
Yeah.
right? This is how we described it when we went
It'd be
through
like,
the small catechism.
I really want your garage. I really, really like the garage. And if there was and I know that my mother in particular has a addiction to remodeling homes. And let's say another home.
An addiction.
Let's say another home came up in Big Bear that probably wasn't in your best interest to buy and go remodel yet again.
Into buying it.
And I talked her into buying it so that you would sell me your home with the garage.
It's like
I'd make your life miserable, but it would look right. It would look like everybody won.
I do this with my dad. So my dad's a pastor, and he's got a lot of books, and we both love books. And so, what do you think I do at Christmas time?
You go shopping in his
library?
library?
I go shopping for his library because I know that it'll be my library someday.
Oh, what do you think?
Oh, you buy him books you want.
I buy him books that we both want. It's not wrong, but it is sort of self-interested.
That's funny.
I
buy him both books we both want.
That's a good.
Caleb should start doing that with tools for me. He should buy me tools that we both
Wait, 1
want.
second. Start doing it?
Oh, okay.
Remember when we were in Harbor Freight last week and I was like, do you want this level? What about this?
But I bought that.
Yeah, exactly. I did it both ways.
Oh, gosh.
Take you shopping, make you buy it with your own money.
Oh, how funny.
So, he really does make this a little simpler on us than in the Small Catechism by combining this. When we were doing the episode on the Small Catechism, I was like, the timing came out weird. And so the 9th and the 10th were on separate episodes.
Oh, yeah, that does come out weird. And I think, again, the point here is the world isn't going to think, if you tell somebody not to covet, you might be able to say it's not good for them, but good luck telling them it's a sin, apart from a commandment like this and apart from they're already sort of having faith in God on account of Christ and trusting the Scriptures. Good luck telling somebody that it's bad to want something so bad, that somebody else is so bad that you desire to make it your own.
We do this subconsciously. This is just this is one of those ones where you're doing it. If you're me, you're doing it as you're driving down the highway, right? As you're driving down the highway, you're looking at homes that are bigger than yours. You're looking at cars that are nicer than yours. You're looking at businesses which you wish you could own. The whole world becomes something you want.
Well, and it's funny, you do that every stage in life. When you're poor, you look at what the middle class people have and say, if I could only have that. And then when you're middle class, you look at upper middle class people. Well, if only I could have what they have. And when you're upper middle class, you look at the moderately rich and say, if only I had what they had, then it would be enough. And then when you're rich, moderately rich, you look at the normal rich.
And when you're Scott's age, you're coveting the nice retirement communities that people.
No, I'm not coveting that. I would go crazy. All those people do is sit around in their own houses and then go talk to other people.
That's not your favorite thing.
I need things to putz around on. Retirement farm. Is there a retirement farm out there somewhere?
It is interesting talking about this as sin with people out in the world.
Yeah.
Because we do believe that the Ten Commandments correspond to the natural law. So we're not...
I'd say that the other way around. If there is a concept of natural law, it's only because it corresponds to the Ten Commandments.
What do you think would be the difference?
I think that the only way you can know that these are laws is because they are from God, rather than sort of postulating whether natural law is an actual law.
Yeah, I'd have to think more about that. I have in mind here what Luther says about the commandments and how Christians should regard Moses.
Oh, well, I think that's interesting. I've been rereading some Homer, right? And Odysseus retelling his tales of the wayward islands. And the first thing they ask if they go to somewhere that's inhabited, and that they lightly know it, is, are they God-fearing? The people, so when he ends up on the island of the Cyclopses, are these God-fearing people? When we show up, will they be fearful of the gods? And that's how you knew if they would have laws or not.
Well, yeah. What I'm arguing, this is going to get a little technical, but what I'm arguing for here, John, is that I'm basically deontologist or divine revelation guy. I think the only way you can know whether or not these things apply to everyone, you'll put that sort of in quotes, right? Not believe, not think, but know whether these laws apply to everybody or not is whether or not they are actually from God, from whom all good things flow.
Right.
Now, Paul acknowledges that we know these things because they're written on our hearts, but he later goes on to say that they're written on our hearts because God put them there. And then you have sort of the verification of the people with the book that can actually tell you that these things that you quote unquote know
Or in
because
fact,
they're in your heart,
divine.
but they're actually divine and that God actually wrote them down.
Yeah, I'd have to think more about that to know if I'd agree. But I think we would agree that. Oh, I'll reframe it. When we talk about the Ten Commandments, we're talking about like the minimum functioning requirements of life in God's creation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you are aligned with these, you're living well in the creation, and none of us do. But this would apply. This is why we would say it's natural. This would apply to any human being anywhere in the world,
Sure.
regardless of culture.
That's good.
And it's just an interesting. It's an interesting exercise. Maybe trying to talk to people about how coveting is actually a sin, and it's not just a sin because the Bible tells me so. Like the world just does not work if you have a covetous society.
Well, and it's not just a sin because of what it does to you personally on the inside.
Well, which is where that's the breaking point,
Yeah.
right, between the Christian faith and the Christian understanding
Right.
of sin and our culture's understanding of
Right.
sin, which is really it's all a sort of function of either self-harm or
Societal.
maybe harming the society.
Well, I mean, Luther really does make this clear that there are societal issues here because the society doesn't function when just laws are used for unjust purposes. And so that's one of the things that results in coveting in his examples here. I mean, most of the examples have to do with using societal systems to get things
Right.
that you shouldn't have. And that tears down order very quickly if you can use the fine print of the law to actually do the very thing that the law prohibits.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think that that was my point earlier when I was teaching this at the university, these concepts at the universities, that they do apply like across the board. We see these in societies.
Even though this is the first one, people would say it doesn't.
Even though you don't see this one, right? There's not going to be
it's the least obvious.
It's the least obvious.
Yeah. I mean, this is one of those ones that's easy to keep secret. Let's see here. So now we actually have the close of the commandments in here as well. But let's read, let me see the closing paragraph to this before we go to the close of the commandments. Therefore, we allow these commandments to remain in their ordinary meaning, that it is commanded first that we do not desire our neighbor's damage, nor even assist or give occasion for it, but gladly wish and leave him what he has, and besides advance and preserve him what may be for his profit and service, as we should wish to be treated. Thus, these commandments are especially directed against envy and miserable avarice, God wishing to remove all causes and sources when arises everything by which we do injury to neighbor, and therefore he expresses it in plain words, thou shalt not covet. For he would especially have the heart pure, although we shall never attain that as long as we live here, so that this commandment will remain, like all the rest, one that will constantly accuse us and show us how godly we are in the sight of God. I mean, that closing sentence is great, that these commandments remain so that one will constantly accuse us.
Lex semper accusat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's what we were saying at the beginning of the last one, is that you are going to get some exhortation from these. The question then becomes whether or not that exhortation is going to what it's going to accomplish. You'll be reminded to follow these commandments, and you'll be reminded of the consequences for not following these commandments. But these commandments, as Luther explains them, and the deeper he explains them, you will likely see more and more how you sin against these commandments.
Yeah, the law imparts knowledge of God's will, and it does so to Christians as well. It teaches us things about God, his desire for us, his desire for our neighbor, the desire for how he be treated and spoken about, all this. But the result of that teaching is this last sentence here, that one will always accuse us.
Yep.
Luther goes into detail about these commandments, not because he's giving you a detailed schematic as to how you can actually accomplish them. He's giving you details and practical details so that you are left no route for escape.
Well, you kind of get the classic Lutheran theological tension with these, is that he's giving you the details about how to fulfill these commandments with every idea that you ought to try to fulfill these commandments.
Yep.
And then with every knowledge that you won't be able to. And with every knowledge that at the end of the day, all of this explanation is going to lead to you being accused.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So then why don't we go to the conclusion here. Conclusion of the Ten Commandments. Thus we have the Ten Commandments, a compend of divine doctrine as to what we are to do in order that our whole life may be pleasing to God, and the true fountain and channel from which everything must arise and flow that is to be good work, so that outside of the Ten Commandments no work or thing can be good or pleasing to God, however great or precious it be in the eyes of the world. Let us see now what our spiritual great saints can boast of their spiritual orders and their great and grievous works, which they have invented and set up, while they let these pass, as though they were far too insignificant or had long been ago perfectly fulfilled.
All you get in here is Luther saying, no matter how, I think you could say this civilly or in the church, no matter how many more laws you make beyond these 10 commandments, you're not going to find anything that surpasses them. You can make all sorts of other sort of ritual practices that you think are required and necessary, but you'll never surpass the goodness that comes out of the 10 Commandments.
And you'll never make people more righteous.
And you'll never make people more righteous by it. You can pass more laws, even civilly, than these, but you're never going to find ones that get more to the core of how we live with one another in peace and civility than these.
Right.
Yeah, I like what Luther says there as well. It kind of connects with what Formula Concord 6 describes as one of the purposes of the law in the life of the Christian is to keep us from inventing false good works.
Yep.
And the problem is that false good works are actually sins.
Yeah.
Yes.
When we invent works that are not actually good, but that make us think that we're sinning.
Yeah, well, there's sins that are encrusted with sanctimoniousness and self-righteousness.
And that's why they're dangerous.
Yeah. Oh, and to do the ones that were good, rely on this idea that the Decalogue's been fulfilled in works somewhere already.
Yeah.
Like you said, even the monastic movements of his time invented many more ways to be righteous while believing that they had already fulfilled all of these. And thus they stopped to teach these. Stopped teaching these.
That leads into the next paragraph, which is like, you can't. And that's, your hands are going to be full. I love, that's the first expression that happens here. I'm of the opinion, indeed, that here one will find his hands full and will have enough to do to observe these, namely meekness, patience, and love towards enemies, chastity, kindness, and what such virtues imply. But such works are not of value and make no display in the eyes of the world, for they are not peculiar or conceited works, and are restricted to particular times, places, rites, and customs, but are common, everyday domestic works, which one neighbor can practice towards the other. Therefore, they are not of high esteem. It's like, how busy can you get? This is as busy as you could get. Your plate will be entirely full if the law isn't, like the law as written here is in front of you.
Yeah, and towards the middle of this section, he adds in the section of the opening of the commands. For I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generation of them that hate me, and showing mercy unto thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments. As this is a reminder, right? This is a reminder that if you're wondering about what to teach regarding what God desires of you, and you want to start going off into the weeds, into other things, into man-made things, into other forms of righteousness are being taught in the church, don't bother with it, because this is what God asks. This is what he asks to be taught, and this is what he asked to be observed.
Yeah.
And that this is what is a promise, is his, I guess you could call it a promise. Promise is attached to here that this is what he'll remember.
Right. Yeah, well, so Luther comes down just a couple more paragraphs, 322, talks about the threat and the promise here. Now there's comprehended in these words both an angry word of threatening and a friendly word of promise that terrifies and warns, moreover to induce and encourage us to receive and highly esteem the word as a matter of divine earnestness, because he himself declares how much he is concerned about it and how rigidly he will enforce it, namely that he will horribly and terribly punish all who despise and transgress the commandments, and again how he will reward and bless and do good to those who hold them in high esteem and gladly do and live according to them. Thus he demands that all our works proceed from a heart which fears and regards God alone, and for such fears avoids everything that is contrary to his will, lest it should move him to wrath, and on the other hand also trust in him alone, and from love to him does all he wishes, because he speaks to us as a friendly father and offers us all grace and every good.
Well, then he goes on to connect that to the teaching of the first commandment, and basically saying if you want to know sort of the reason why the rest of these commandments have the force that they have, or which commandment they all are imparted from, or which commandment they all sort of flow from, look no further than the first commandment, right?
Yep.
You establish who God is, what he says about you there, and from there all these others flow. All these 10 words flow.
I think as I read through here, the context of holy orders and other sorts of laws are coming up more and more in here. You see that the 10 Commandments are being compared against other earthly commands. And I think for Luther, he seemingly had in mind things like monkish orders or creating laws which are seemingly holy and just to God. I think today you can see that, and we've talked about this on the show, how the world around us creates laws constantly, which have an accusatory force, but also are new or tell you where a new holiness can be found.
Yeah, to riff on Calvin, the heart is a law-making factory.
Yes.
That's absolutely true, man. Just get married, and you'll find out.
Yeah. So, well, it's on the shorter side, but is there anything else we need to say before we do this? I'm not going. We shouldn't start the next section of the Catechism quite yet. I was asking you.
Oh, no, not in this episode. Sorry. No. I think it's important to say that he admonishes this again. You saw this at the beginning. He admonishes again how important it is to teach young people these things.
That's a good reminder.
Yeah. And to sort of also to revisit them, not to lose them for the sake of inventing something new. That's always our temptation. I mean, obviously the temptation of the church in his time, the temptation of the church in our time to invent something new to teach rather than to make sure that people know the basics of the Christianity solidly.
Well, I think in the creation of new laws, and not just by this, we don't mean just like civil laws that are passed for order, but in new sort of just generically ethical laws, that a lot of them will have reflection to the 10 Commandments, but that the goal will be different actually, and that the goal is self-serving. So that's why he brings up monks all the time, right? That what they do is seemingly righteous, but it has the ends of making their life purely good, better, or more advantaged in maybe just in holiness. I mean, monks suffered. What's funny is you have monkish suffering for the sake of advantage, and in our world that exists too. You have the crafting of new holiness, which is maybe some sort of personally induced suffering, but it's actually for the sake of your advantage over and against your neighbor.
Well, his larger point on that is always that you can't fulfill the commandments to serve your neighbor in these ways if you take yourself out of society.
Yeah.
Like if your solution to disobeying the commandments which exhort you to keep your neighbor safe and sound and to do well by them, if your solution to that is by taking yourself out of society, that's not the solution.
Yeah, and it's it's interesting because obviously some monks and nuns work on behalf of the poor,
Sure.
suffering people, but in some ways the sort of withdrawal from the world, re-entering it only to
do the most obvious
good works. It's almost a way of taking a perfectly good and charitable thing that you do for other people and
tarnishing it.
Well, at least sort of setting it's a very covert way of setting yourself out front of the good works that you're doing. But I don't know. I won't attack monasticism anymore today. But
I think the point is that it's maybe easy to believe that it's better to do that, right? To take yourself out of common society in order to do something extra special, like just serve the poor, than it is to stay within your vocation and really do the hard, person-to-person grind of protecting your neighbor.
And part of it too is like poverty is part of the ideal of monasticism, and so you almost join the poor in their poverty,
right?
In order to, just like display your lack of attachment to creaturely possessions. But the problem with that, of course, is that if there's a complete disregard of vocation and the good things about creation and the things in it, and the ways that we supply one another's needs through economic exchange, through work, through family, through having a responsibility, through engaging with our society.
And that to steal from Bayer, that the world has been given back to us in Christ.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right, guys. Hey, thank you for listening to this episode. Thank you for listening if you made it with us through the entirety of the commandments in both now the small and the large catechisms. It's been fun to read through them while this has been going on. My wife has been teaching my kids the small catechism, and so every once in a while I'll come down the stairs and hear little voices reciting the 10 Commandments, which is great. And so if this has been an encouragement or a use for families out there as well, or a reminder to take up the catechism once again, or maybe for the first time within the home, I don't know. That is sort of the goal for me, and I just say it did that for me as well. As we were doing this, I was thinking, we need to do this more regularly.
Nice.
And sort of some of the words from Luther in here that families should be reading this together struck the heart. And so a good reminder for me, and I hope also a good reminder for the listeners of our show. Thank you for listening to this episode. You can support the Thinking Fellows in 1517 at 1517.org/donate. You can check out the rest of the shows at 1517.org/podcasts. If you would like to subscribe to the Thinking Fellows, if you've just listened here and out, we're available wherever podcasting is found. So if you've visited our website, you can also go to Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, find the show there. If you subscribe, they'll automatically show up for you. Never miss an episode. You can listen when you want or how you want. Again, thanks for listening to this episode. We will catch you next time. Bye.